we actually didn't have intercourse or anything. And I had the most blissful experience that I've ever had. And I was like, okay, then.
Okay, that's pretty cool. Yeah.
That is like an electric light show. You can do this just by yourself.
Oh, wow.
There is now time to now up level to the next stage of sexuality. The conventional orgasm is like a quick fire, but it burns out very fast. If you have a blue flame, it
Really?
can burn eternally.
Welcome all you nomads, both you vets and newcomers. If you couldn't already tell, this episode is the first in a special series on the devotional art of Tantra. We're gonna dive into its history in the East and what changed in its export to the West, how Tantric practices, whether performed with a partner or with yourself, can heal trauma through connecting you with your mind, body, and soul, and even lead to earth-shattering orgasms you never thought were possible, all by sitting still and breathing. Not bad, huh? Thea, my guest of course in episode 2 of Noetic Nomads, is a native of Bonn, Germany who's traveled all over the world and immersed herself in disciplines ranging from Ayurveda and sacred temple dance to Thai massage, naturopathic nutrition, world cuisine, and of course, Tantra. Now, what the hell is Tantra? If you're anything like me, you're probably thinking, Tantra is some like Indian sex thing. I can't blame you for that. Thea will go into Tantra's history and how the sexual revolution in the 60s may have helped create the perception of what many people have of Tantra today. We'll also talk about the non-dual Tantric tradition that she's a part of, which has been gaining in popularity recently, and how this may signal a paradigm shift in sexuality. Thea and I are cooking up some ideas on how to bring more tantric knowledge and practices to the community. I'd love to hear in the comments what you're curious about and what kind of content you'd like to see in the future. You can also send me a message on the Noetic Nomads community site at noeticnomads.org or send me a tweet at noeticnomads.org. Okay, now enjoy part 1 of the sacred art of Tantra, upleveling our sexuality. Like a lot of people, like, I don't know, like, for example, like, I'm coming from my perspective, right? I know nothing about Tantra, right? The only thing I knew before, like, we met each other is Tantra is some like Indian sex thing. Like, that's all I knew about it. So when I hear about that and like we talk about love is not just like, you know, like you say, the 30 seconds of whatever, you know, bliss down here. It's all that. So like again, like I talk about misconceptions. I don't even know anything. So like,
Okay.
can you tell us about like about the history and like the origins
Yeah.
of Tantric Samadhi? And like what
Yes.
the scriptures talked about and all that. Yeah.
Right. The scriptures talked about, we would be here for another week, right?
Okay.
But let's get to how the scriptures got developed.
I see.
So it probably happened like 400 years after Christ that actually the scriptures got written down, right?
All written
And
down.
then written down. Okay, so that doesn't mean they haven't existed before. There, for example, in the Vedic tradition, and you know, I studied Ayurveda from a health perspective. It traditionally was given in the tradition of the family by word of mouth, literally.
Yeah.
Nothing was written down, right? So that means we sometimes see like cave paintings that people literally put paintings on the walls about positions, for example. Yeah, but that was their way of writing. But everything else was an oral transmission. That means the tradition stayed always in the family. And you had a family of doctors, you had a family of painters, or a family. So it stayed there for in the lineage of that family, that maybe 10, 15, 20, 30 being, you know, humans have passed along. So, but then that's when it started to get written down. Okay. So, and it came from the sutras, which is more from the Hindu tradition. But then we also have a Buddhist Tantra and Tibetan Tantra.
Yeah.
So some of them have different tradition, and their belief, it's been given. For example, in the Buddhists, they believe there were these enlightened Buddhas, and there were sages that got the transmission, that were being taught, right? And they were holding the lineage. And even though when it started to be written, the language was still obscured. It was obscure. It's like Nostradamus, actually.
Okay.
Nostradamus wrote in codes because he was afraid they would they would kill him, basically. So it's the same with the Tantric tradition, that it was encoded. So then only sages knew how to decode the information. So out of that stems that you would get a transmission. I've received that while I was in India in my 20s, right? I received it from an Ayurvedic perspective, which was mostly for health and cooking and preparing food, in a very particular way. And this sounds maybe to the Western mind a little I don't know, spooky or woo-woo or whatever. And it's actually an art form. It's once we understand that we are energy bodies, which is what I'm going to be teaching, for us to open these 5 bodies, the 5 koshas, which is one of the part was the bliss body. We all talk about the bliss body. Yeah. The transmission is, I describe it in the way I've experienced it. You suddenly feel like you can cook a dish that you never cooked before, and it's coming through you.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So you just know. So, and it's because my energy channels are clear. I've been cooking with this Indian woman that only speaks Hindu. I only really speak German because I said my English was very, not very trained. And by being with her and experiencing it as there was pleasure, there was a form of pleasure, and we often associate pleasure. I'm just saying it, with like an orgasm or with sensual, there was a pleasure for me being with the food that is making love to the food. So we in the West have a very narrow way of what we call pleasure, sensual, and lovemaking. This is literally has a very narrow frame of reference, what that means, right? In the East, everything can be an art form. Everything is an art form. We call a painter an artist, but we in the West, we are not calling, let's even take it a chef, an artist. I mean, we're getting more to that. In the last 10 years, there has a lot happened in the culinary world that we see chefs more as artists now, right? And coming back to the transmission, it felt literally like how you put spices together, especially in the Vedic tradition, is an alchemization that your digestive system and the taste buds, meaning the pleasurable part of it, are one thing. So the more the food is balanced, the more the digestive system is easy to go and is facilitated, the more you actually absorbing the prana from the food, or the nutrients from the food as well, the energetic as much as the physical. The physical is the nutrients and the energetic part. And so if you have someone that loves cooking, you actually receiving that love through the food. Yeah. So that's all included in. So if we take that into lovemaking, you can see now how I make love, how present I am, how open my body is. It's actually all the same thing. So the transmission comes that your channels are opened. For example, I meditated a lot. I did a lot of yoga. I cleaned out my whole chakra system. I didn't know I was doing that. I was just fascinated by it. So Tantra comes from the yogic tradition, where it includes meditation, it includes breath, which we're talking about later. And what is the tantric breath versus other breaths? I love that question. So where we literally clearing up the chakra system with the breath. And it's a very particular way how we do that. So that was the transmission that I can only say. I've been with these women, I've cooked with them once or twice, and I was inspired to go home, cook, and it just feels like it just works through me.
I mean, that transmission thing is the reason why I like reacted so much when you said that, because when this Noetic Nomads project, I feel like I'm channeling something. I feel like a vessel. Like I don't feel like, oh, I'm doing this. In order to be inspired to do what I do, I empty myself. And then I'm like asking the void to speak through me. I'm like, I am your vessel. Guide my hand. So that's like, that to me is like very similar to what you're doing. Like, feel like I'm channeling something greater than myself when I'm doing all this stuff.
Right. So basically, Tantra, it's a yogic practice. And, the thing is that what I love about Tantra, probably my main thing is that some traditions see the body as the lowest energy, and they see sex, mere biologically driven, that by that I mean hormone driven sex, which is more the animalistical part of us that we still have. There's nothing wrong with that. But also talking about evolution and consciously participating evolution is like we can alchemize and bring that to a greater level of awareness. What we are doing with our sexual energy, which is life force, and that's what Eros is. Eros is also called evolutionary impulse. That is always there to upgrade. It's an upgrade. It's not an up and down. So we're not getting into dual way of good and bad. This is better. It's not none about that. That's in the dual. It's more like, do you want to be more artful? Or do you want to make not even more artful? Our words are so limiting, or
yeah, exactly.
our words are very dual, right? Do I want to be an artful, loving lover? Am I interested in that? I might not. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah. So this is about that you feel, okay, I'm done with this. I'm kind of bored with regular conventional sex, and I really would like to talk about the conventional orgasm versus the tantric orgasm.
And through all this, I've come to my own definition of Tantra. I know you don't want to define it. The way I see it, from what I gather, is like Tantra is all encompassing love, not just for you, for this, for your partner, for everything. And like the reason that perhaps in the West that it's looked at in this like kind of perverted ways, because in the West we're very dualistic. We're like the Abrahamic, the Judeo-Christian tradition is like they see sex as bad. So they're like, oh my God, look at this sex part, and then like they're separating it as like this. Since Tantra is so free about sex as part of the all-encompassing love, they kind of focus on that, and they go crazy about that, and they don't, and like then they get like this distorted view of it, when really it's just all encompassing love, all expressing love. That's not evil, that's not bad, it's natural and it's beautiful. So that's my definition of Tantra. I don't know if it's anything close to what yours is, but that's what I got of it.
Yeah, so the only distinction I want to make is I don't want to get into a judgment that this is wrong and this is good and this is bad.
Okay. You're right.
I like to not go into the dual part of even saying, okay, this is Neotantra, which is the Tantra being named at in the 60s. Maybe we can have another small conversation about this, how I'm seeing what happened in the 60s and why, and there is no judgment. If you come from a non-dual, then this is all okay, right? So even us holding the non-dual is not judging or labeling, even take the word labeling or making one good better than the other. It's everything inclusive. So we including and transcend.
Okay,
yeah,
I got you.
But it's included, it's welcomed back in, because there is a reason why this has all happened. So, and that is the evolution of sexuality. So there isn't any wrong, right or wrong. It's just, what are you interested in? What do you want to do at this point in time?
I see. Thank you for correcting me. That makes perfect sense. Awesome. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of Tantra?
So the reason why it's so good when you say about the history, because there are different histories according to which tradition, and there are numerous traditions, as I said earlier, right? So maybe let's start then in the 60s, right? So, and for that, I want to actually go back in anything before the 50s, and then even like 1500th century, right? Where we know that women were, first of all, regarded almost like as lower than men. Yeah. So we what they say right now, we're coming out of a 5,000 year of patriarchal society, and by that it doesn't necessarily mean men as in men, and and there's a whole idea about what that means, including Adam and Eve and all that kind of religious stuff that been made up by the clergyman that changed, and science came in even in the 1500th century, and then science got disconnected from the church, so that the scientists then could actually take over the spiritual part and left actually the body to the church, because even sexuality is like bad, and the women, especially the women, have been seen as the cause of problems by Eve biting the apple. We are the enticing factor, but we can't get it right. We are enticing, but with that comes the bad, right? So coming back from that, women are basically almost like like lower than men. We know in this country, talking about the current time, 2020, the right to vote, for example, is not that long ago, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So we coming out of that, and I think something happened then in the 60s, that women fought for more equality. That started with the feminist movement. There was a very strong feminist movement in there. And so that was the liberation also of our sexuality. Finally, we are like, we are free. We own our bodies. We are proud of our bodies. There have been, we coming out of the chastity belt. Yeah, that whole tradition. Yeah. We coming out of, women can actually go to work and earn a living. So they're no longer dependent on the man. So it's interesting that husband comes from the word house band.
House band.
You are bound around
I
the
see what you're
house.
saying. Cool.
Right, so that's actually where the origin stems from. So you all know where I'm coming from. So the 60s basically is the liberation of women, the liberation of taking the chastity belt off, more on an emotional level, not so much physically. That was relieved much earlier, but emotionally, psychically, we are for thousands of years housebound, bound to the man, dependent to the man. Yeah. And sexually is very much still, we are serving the man, right? We are serving the man. Yeah. So your generation is maybe not so much clued into this. And my generation, I'm born in the 60s. I was already very liberated. My parents were very liberated. So I coming from that generation, but it feels like probably the people that are now 70, they went through that liberation, and they just suddenly, there were Indian gurus like Osho, other people were coming here, they were telling us about Tantra. And I mean, this is my personal view, my personal experience with speaking with, like I said, hundreds of people around this and looking into this. You taking a tradition that comes out of a very, very different culture, out of the language of Sanskrit, that is a vibrational language. It's not analytical, it's not from the mind. So you're using something from a different culture that entails all meditation, all of that, putting one aspect of that into a culture that is completely different. So we can only understand, with the level of consciousness and cultural conditioning, we can only understand that culture to some aspect.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So we're not understanding the whole, some people try to do yoga and all of that, but I have a sense that the liberation sexually was so necessary and was so behind, almost like I want to say behind, that people just went wild with the information, what we understand grown up in this culture out of Tantra and sexuality. Yeah. And we interpreted, oh, they're having all this great sex and all of that, but not knowing this is a yogic and it's a sacred practice, and practitioner practice this for decades to actually, practice this as an art form. That all got lost, because it's not in our psyche, it's not in our culture. And we took what we wanted to hear, which is sexual liberation, and meaning you don't need to be married, you can have several partners. And that, looking at the psyche over hundreds of years, we have all our conditioning from our parents, our grandparents in the ancestral line. We just wanted that liberation and took it. And if you had an extreme like that, from burning the witches to chastity belts to you can't vote, you're completely dependent financially on any level on your husband. Sometimes that sounds to us right now very extreme. You also have to go into the other extreme and go completely wild. Yeah. That is kind of a natural tendency. So that's why partially I think, these masters, they tried their best working with the Western mind, but really, how do you do that? A tradition that is like 2,000 years old, how would you teach people that are thirsty for freedom and for sexual liberation? You're not teaching them that in overnight or even in a year or two, plus coming from a different culture, So basically say there's nothing wrong with that. What I'm sensing right now, that there is enough more of us also at the time where we are in participating consciously in evolution, that we know there is now time after how many years, 40, 60 years, to now up level to the next stage of sexuality.
And so, how would you describe this up level in sexuality? Is it somehow related to non-dual? How would you describe that?
Yes, exactly. That's where I would see it from a non-dual perspective. Exactly. That is the next level, and we talked about that a little bit earlier. I wanted to, go back into getting from the traditional, the Tantra, where it originally, what it meant in the East, right? So the Tantric text, like we were saying, they are between 300 and 400, after Christ. There were like poetic metaphors pointing to oneness and divine love. Yeah. So, and these first writings were purposely obscured that only initiates would understand them. That comes in with what we talked earlier also about the transmission. It's a very different way of being that in the West is not our way of being at all. So it's something that we need to learn, like we're learning a brand new language. And I often say, if you speak Spanish and French and you want to learn Italian, it's fairly simple. But I want to compare it. We are learning Japanese and Chinese. Yeah, so it's very different. Yeah, and basically, and the Tantra. What I love about the Tantra, in comparison to the practices, where we talked earlier, the body isn't being included. That Tantra is a spiritual practice, which means your mind comes into play as much as your body. So in a lot of meditation practices, like the body is the bad thing, it's going to be ignored, in numerous traditions. But when you practice Tantra, you're connecting to your body, your mind, and your soul. And the other thing, talking about the shadow, is that you learning to be with the mind, to practice the mind. You learning to practice the breath and your emotion. And that requires that there is a willingness to step out of your comfort zone so that you can actually unite all those parts of yourself.
Mhm.
And that uniting, that's is what Tantra actually means. It's weaving. It's weaving all these
Ah,
separate
I see.
thoughts into more like a oneness and inclusiveness of all. So we're not excluding the apparently lower emotions or lower parts of our body. We're
Mm.
including and then bringing them up through the heart.
Yeah, I see some parallels there with like integrating my shadow. It's like, bringing like being fully integrated and bringing the wholeness and not like discarding one part. And like I had a lot of trouble before, like when I was going through like a lot of problems, I would try to detach, I'll try to bypass. I'd be like, no, this is not real. And I'll like go into like some spiritual realm and I'd be like, no, this is not real because I don't want to feel the pain, right? But
Yes.
I
Yes.
mean, like, but it's just like I don't know, like, what are your thoughts on that? Because there is still part of me that wants to be like, okay, none of this is real. I don't want to feel this pain anymore. Like, I
Right,
just want
right.
your thoughts about that.
So the Tantra, with having a body positive view, um, exists in the material world. Basically, like classical yoga's viewpoint is that the body is inferior to the transcendental self or spirit. But
Mm-hmm.
where Tantra views the body as a manifestation of spirit,
I see what you're saying. Okay.
right?
Yeah.
So that means that you including all of that. And yes, it means exactly what I said earlier. Are you willing to go and deal with your discomfort? And,
Mm.
if you are not, and maybe especially not in the 60s, people did not want any more discomfort. They finally wanted freedom and pleasure and all of that.
I see
Yeah.
what you're saying. Yeah.
So, but from a tantric perspective now, that's why I'm thinking it's totally understandable or almost like normal that we had to go through this sexual revolution and go, just into the pleasure, into all of that, and especially for women. So the women, they liberated themselves that they could choose a man, they can choose a man, they can have also multiple partners, right? But where it was always more acceptable that men have multiple partners. I'm generalizing here. It has this the viewpoint, or the viewpoint is that men are now having an excuse to no longer be monogamous, right? But
Yeah.
being polyamorous, And the women also took that themselves that right, but that took maybe a little bit longer.
Another thing that I was very interested in is like, okay, this keeps coming up and it's very interesting because again, I don't know the exact terminology to describe it, but you said that you were initiated into the tantric tradition and that you received a transmission. Can you go into what exactly that would entail? And would this also mean that maybe would other people who practice it receive a transmission? Like how would that work, would you say?
Yeah, it does exactly work like that. It is like a big work. It is we are waking up from the illusion that we are separate.
Mm,
We are all one body. We are oneness called. We are one. We are
yeah.
in the unified field, coming back to the quantum and the illusion that we are separate, knowing that we have an energetic, magnetic, and electric body,
Mm,
like we have
yeah.
electricity moving through the spine. Now, earlier we talked about the blockages in the chakra, in the energy centers or chakras. So these blockages stopped the energetic, the electricity literally running through the spine, through
Mm,
the central, we call that the central channel or the shushumna. And the more we undoing the blockages, meaning we're doing the shadow work, we're doing the trauma. To me, shadow and trauma is very directly related. It depends how you want to see it, right? That we opening those centers so that the energy can flow freely. So the transmission, there's two things. There is a transmission that I'm receiving information on a non-verbal, non-linear level.